Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I have a very special video for you today. I am with the lovely Yuliya, who is a Wealth Master Plan student, and she has been so kind to share her goals, her money questions, her money situation with us. I think it's going to be very interesting, a huge learning experience for everybody because Yuliya, why don't you go ahead and just start with so let me just add this slide, and then this will kind of help set the tone here for you to explain to us exactly what your quote unquote chill retirement, as I like to call it, looks like. So you are 27 years old, correct?
Correct.
And your goal is to, I call it chill tire from corporate America in your mid 40s to pursue your dream lifestyle. So I would like for you to kind of let everybody know, set the stage for what your dream lifestyle is. What is that goal?
Yeah, absolutely. So this may not be applicable to everybody, but there is a movement of people that this may be applicable to. My husband and I are very much into homesteading and growing our own food and just living off the land. And we started a small business last year where we raised chickens on pasture. So we kind of already dipped our toe in the water with what that looks like, what it entails. And we just absolutely love spending our time that way, taking care of animals and then also just sourcing our own food and kind of eating the best kind of quality food. And basically our goals are kind of centered around being able to live this lifestyle, full time. And right now, like I'm the furthest away from that, having like working from home in corporate America, regular job. So no really opportunity to like go outside in the morning or at night to take care of these animals, right? When we did it last year, again, luckily I work from home, so can kind of do it before work, after work. My husband's in the trades, so he's a little bit closer to kind of living that lifestyle, but still very much far from, you know, doing what he wants to do. So that pretty much sets the stage for our money goals.
So basically, you want to be able to homestead in your mid 40s, quit corporate America, and work with animals and farm and essentially live off the land, perhaps? Is that the
Yeah,
right way to think about it?
Yeah, that would be, like the majority of our goal. And then if we're able to make money off of that, which plenty of people do, and I think we're, like I told you over email, like we're kind of not even at the starting line yet because we are just getting into our first home, right? Like accomplishing these baby steps. But once we're actually able to like get our hands on things, we're going to be working through the next few decades on how to monetize, those things that we're working on. So there's definitely a potential to make income from that in those years, but we're also baby steps. So the first goal is to just be able to be like self sustaining with providing enough for ourselves.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to go through kind of your overall situation, financial situation. So you and your spouse have W-2 wages, where that's just basically what that means for anybody who doesn't know is essentially you have W-2 wages from an employer, or you have 1099 contractor work, like you are not employed by anybody, you kind of work for yourself and do freelance jobs, or you're, self-employed, right? So W-2 wages in this scenario for both of you. And you did mention that you've been dabbling in the business, but it's still starting out. So there is a small business generating a loss,
Mhm.
which can net against your active income in this case. So that eventually you're hoping to make an income with this business down the line.
Mhm.
Um, as far as debt goes, kudos to you. Snaps for Yuliya, because you only have your mortgage. You do what I do, which is you have your credit card that you charge your expenses, and then you pay it off in full every single month. No interest to the credit card company, so that's good. And then it sounds like you've paid off your student debt, which is a huge accomplishment. So congratulations, that's awesome. So really, your overall financial picture is really good. Especially the fact that you don't have credit card debt piled up, you don't have student debt anymore, and now you can really kind of, this is where it gets fun with finances, because you can take this and sculpt your financial life from here exactly, to reach your goals the way you want to, instead of having to deal with debts. So you're in a fantastic spot. Congratulations to you and your husband. Now, for your investing, you said that you're maxing out your 401k with your salary deferral. So salary deferrals, essentially, for anybody who doesn't know, everybody that has access to a qualified 401k plan, whether that's Roth or traditional, you get up to a certain amount of money every single year that you can take from your salary and put it into that 401k and get possibly a tax deduction if you're doing a traditional 401k. So Yuliya, you're doing a traditional 401k, so that was 19,500 a year that you were putting in, and now that might increase. Are you going to increase that as the limits increase? Because
Yeah,
they went from 19,500 to 20,000.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's the goal for as long as I can. We have kids coming up on the slides that will potentially be one of the stumbling blocks with savings. And the maxing out really started kind of more recently in the last like 1 to 2 years. And honestly, looking back, like the reason that it wasn't maxed out in the prior years before that was kind of silly. It was just the lack of understanding of like how the money caps out, and for some reason I didn't have the question, I didn't ask the right questions to like even my HR department to see like, is it automatically going to stop, or like I was always afraid to over contribute so that to get a penalty, like never wanting to deal with the IRS concept.
Yeah.
So it's kind of silly, but yes, from like this year going forward, like that's the goal, is to just continue maximizing it for as long as we can. Hopefully the salary will appreciate and balance out
Yeah.
other.
Yeah, yeah. And the fact of the matter is, and you may have learned this in the training program, but there's actually a contribution limit for a qualified plan that's very high. It's $61,000. So you have your salary deferral, which is that 20,500 that you're doing. You're contributing to
Mhm.
that. But if people do go over that amount, that money will just be, after tax money. You won't get
Yeah.
penalized unless your employer and you both contribute over, that $61,000. So it's actually a pretty high bar to reach to be in a
Yeah.
situation where you're over contributing. So that's good. But with you, you're managing a salary deferral up to the limit to get that traditional tax deduction. So that's good that you're able to do that. And the other thing is, you are contributing to your IRA. You're maxing out your IRA in addition to your traditional 401k, which you had told me in an email you didn't know you could do
Yeah.
until taking
Of
the
course.
course. Is that's So a lot of people don't know that, and the fact of the matter is that you can have both. There are just certain limitations that you have to watch out for if you make too much income, which I talk about that a lot. I think we emailed back and forth about that a little bit, actually.
Yeah.
So your spouse is maxing out his traditional IRA and invests extra money into a taxable brokerage. So I guess I was going to ask you about this point, in terms of how much. You don't have to give, a specific dollar amount, but
Mhm.
is is the is there money every month going into a taxable brokerage account?
No. So again, this is very the shaping up of the investment accounts is like very recent. So as of taking your course, starting earlier this year, what we did right, I think, since we met in our earlier 20s, was we were just frugal and we're natural savers. What we did wrong was we didn't invest, and so with everything kind of taking place and like kind of forming our goals for the next 5 to 10 years, my requirement for us this year was we need to get our finances organized and get into this best position possible, hence your course. And it's really helped us to get to this point. So my husband is going to be maxing out his personal IRA for the first time this year, actually, because again, we're pushing ourselves to do that because of all the stuff we've learned. And the extra brokerage account, we're actually going to be creating a joint account. I actually held off creating it until we had this conversation. And we're going to start contributing like whatever money we had left over after we just purchased this house. We're going to dump in there. And I don't know about monthly, but maybe every few months he can contribute, to that joint account.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's awesome. You guys are on the right track. You're ahead of a lot of people, and I think you should be very proud of the situation you're in right now. So let's chat about your goals a little bit. You want to retire comfortably. You want to retire early, which is a really big trend right now. Have you heard of the FIRE movement?
Yeah. So I've heard of it
Yeah,
in preparation for this conversation, and we've been driving a lot lately, like just looking at podcasts. There's definitely a huge community around the fire movement, and I think that's what we need to delve into more. They definitely have helpful information, but also just the mentality and the repetition of these goals is really helpful for us, because not a lot of people in my personal life are on this track.
yeah, yeah. We're I guess a community that bands together, and we like to we like to talk to other people about how they're doing it. And we didn't realize, like my husband and I didn't realize that we were quote unquote fire until like after fire. We were doing this front loading retirement thing, investing as much as you can, long before we even knew what the fire movement was. And then
Yeah.
later the fire movement comes on, and we're looking at it and we're like, I guess we're fire, but not like frugal fire. We're just investing as much as we can, and if whatever you want to call it, that's fine. But it was just kind of funny when we came to the realization that we were
Yeah.
actually in
That's
that
a category
community,
for you.
yeah, in some way, shape, or form. So you talked about this a little bit, possibly having kids and then purchasing a rental property. So those are your main goals. Now let's get into the good stuff. Let's get into your questions, because what this is going to do is we're going to go through your questions, and then we're going to get into problem solving. We're going to be, doing some financial planning fun. So I'm excited. I'm excited about this. So let's start with your first question. It's, are you on the right path towards your long-term goals? Anything that you want to say or add to that specific point before we get into that?
I think that's really it. And I think probably a lot of it is confidence at this point. I think in the last several months we like cleaned up a lot of things, organized a lot of things. And a lot of principles from your course were kind of like, repetitions of things I've heard here and there. Um, and then you kind of look back at some point, and you're like, really, is this really all I need to be doing? Because I kind of was following this path, contributing to a 401k. The investing on my own was new to me. Um, so now it's like, I think we have it under control, but do we really? And like, I feel like we just need that confidence boost of like, we've done the right things. And I guess, investing in the right things, making sure we're not putting our money into the wrong ETFs is a
Yeah,
really
we're
important.
gonna talk about that. Well, we're gonna touch on that. But I think that as we go into the questions, we will answer the question of, are you on the right path towards your
Yeah.
long-term goals? So we're gonna kind of circle back to that in the very end of this.
Cool.
So tools for finding your fire number. Finding your fire number is basically finding the number that you need to have invested to be able to retire at, whatever specific age and survive off of your money, essentially, right? So this is something that you are, based on the facts that you gave me, this is something that you are definitely on the path to, getting your fire number, invested and saved up, and being able to quit corporate America in your mid 40s, which is pretty early to quit corporate America.
Yeah.
The good news about what you're doing is you want to quit corporate America, but you might earn income from 45 years old on, right,
Mhm.
into retirement. So there's that possibility of earning income to supplement, which will make what you're doing now even better, right? You'll
Mhm.
have, hopefully plenty of money to be retired. But the tools for finding the fire number, I'm going to switch over to my screen sharing here. You should be able to see this retirement calculator, yeah?
Mhm.
So basically, retirement calculators are pretty handy for this type of math and trying to figure out what you need to be saving every single year or month or however you want to break it down. So what I did is I took some of your numbers and we're going to get into the calculations in a few slides, but I took some of your numbers and cross-referenced my calculations on my handy dandy financial financial calculator because I'm a nerd like that, and I cross-referenced to this particular website, and the numbers were right on. I mean, maybe like you know, dollars off, hundreds of
Mhm.
dollars off, but in the scheme of a million, $2 million, that's not a big deal. That's my small issue there. So I
Mhm.
really liked this website, and I encourage anybody to check it out, calculator.net/retirement dash calculator. And you can put in, so Yulia, have you done anything like this with a website like this, kind of plugging in numbers?
Yeah, I've played around actually in preparation for this chat, looking into the life policy that my husband has. We were kind of running similar calculations on like what he could be using that money towards instead of the life policy.
Cool, awesome. So what I did here was I put in, your age is 27, your planned retirement age is 45. I put in your life expectancy as 85, but that is, that's changeable. That completely depends on your history, your family, and all that. You might live till 100. We don't know what's going to happen. So with expected Social Security, I think that this is a really great feature. Do you pay Social Security taxes?
Yes.
Most people do,
Mhm.
unless you are a teacher in an area that you may not pay Social Security taxes. But most people do. I assume your husband does as well.
Yep.
So what I did to be really, really conservative for you is I didn't put any expected Social Security in
Mhm.
because that's just being, extra conservative. That money is like a bonus. If we
If
are
it
going,
comes.
yeah, exactly, right? Like what a lot of people don't realize is yes, Social Security is at risk of being lower later when we retire. um, we may not get 100% of our expected benefit for Social Security. And right now, what the consensus is us as millennials, we're kind of expecting, or Gen Z, or the younger generations,
Mhm.
we're expecting that Social Security will not be, a whole lot, but
Mhm.
it'll be kind of like a little bonus. Like we're not going to get nothing. And the
Mhm.
reason we're not going to get nothing is because people pay payroll taxes, and the payroll taxes are what fund Social Security. So right now, you and I are paying payroll taxes to fund our parents' Social Security checks.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how it works. So I just kept it zero just to be extra conservative. If you get it, it's a great bonus, right? But you can always adjust this if you wanted to put it in to just be safe. And then other income after retirement, if you expected to make money in your business, you'd want to maybe plug that in. But let's just say zero, zero. And
Mhm.
then the other important things that you're going to need to figure this stuff out is your average investment return and your inflation rate.
Mhm.
So the way that you are currently invested, and I'll just kind of pop over to that. So you actually sent me the ETFs that you're invested in.
Mhm.
So what I did was in YCharts, I have the ability to create like a portfolio and figure out returns of that specific portfolio. I had to make some assumptions because I don't know how much of each ETF you have
Mhm.
invested, with the specific dollar amounts. So I had to make some assumptions, but what I wanted to just show you generally is that you're invested in pretty much, from what I can tell, almost 100% in equities or stocks, correct?
Yep.
Okay. There may be some bonds in your target date fund because you have a target date fund.
Mhm.
There may be some bonds in there, but for the most part, you're pretty heavy equities. And
Mhm.
that's fine because you're young and it sounds like maybe you have a higher tolerance for that.
Mhm.
But the returns of I called it the Yuliya portfolio, but it's got it's got IVV, which is a S&P 500 index fund. It's got VTV, which is a value um, ETF, value large cap value ETF. And then it's got what was the third one? It
The
was
Roth
S
Valley one.
Yes. Yes, it was SCHB, pretty sure.
D.
Or no, SCHD,
Yeah.
sorry, SCHD. Yeah, and SCHD is a dividend ETF. It's got high quality dividend stocks in it. And so, a lot of large cap stocks and the returns have been pretty close to the S&P 500, slightly lower returns than the S&P 500 because of the simple fact that you've got the uh, value stocks. Value stocks may not perform as well as growth stocks, which I'm sure that you learned a little bit about that in the
Mhm.
course. And so that's why the performance of the portfolio, it's just a little bit slightly, more conservative, but still a pretty heavy equity portfolio. So I just wanted to kind of show you this to start talking about what we were just talking about, which is
Mhm.
going back to the average investment return, because you kind of have to know what that number is going to be.
Mhm.
And stocks over the past, 100 years or so, the average investment return of the S&P 500 has been around 10% before inflation. So this is where you kind of can dial the investment return expectations to
Mhm.
be either conservative or aggressive.
Yep.
So I guess my question to you is, um, do you prefer to be conservative with the return or a little bit more aggressive with the return?
Yeah, definitely more conservative, especially given that, everything that's happened in the last year in the market, has made me think about, okay, what happens if I'm 45 and, been looking forward to this day to retire, and the market is what it is now, right? And I don't have as much money waiting for me as I thought. And maybe the business is not as profitable as I thought, right? There's obviously the option of, staying in the labor force, but if there's still large enough of a cushion that I can still leave my job and just wait for the market to rebound, in 5 years, I'd prefer that.
Yeah. Yeah, so what I ended up doing is I kind of did two different calculations actually. I did a conservative return of 6%, and then I did a aggressive return of 10%. And that's kind of how you want to mess around with it and just
Mhm.
put different returns in there and figure out, what is going to help you meet your goals while still staying in your risk profile. And the other thing to remember is the older you get, the more you're going to move out of stocks and into
Right.
bonds or into less risky assets.
Mhm.
So that's why, going full balls out 10% return for the next 40, 50 years, that's not really the reality of how it works. So that's why I kind of like utilizing maybe a lower return rate just to be extra conservative. So that's something you can play around with. And then inflation, you have to know your estimated inflation rate. 3% has been the historical range. Who knows what it's going to be going forward, but around 3% has been, even through periods of high inflation, we've still
Mhm.
come out, over time. With the 70s, we had hyperinflation in the 70s. We've
Mhm.
had different periods of high inflation, and it has still averaged about 3%. So that's why I use 3%. But again, you can dial this up or down depending on how conservative or aggressive you'd like to be.
Yep.
So this is kind of how people find their fire numbers. And then you told me that well, you know what I'll do? I'll move right over here real quick so that I can show you what I did. So I made some assumptions. You said that your spending is about 4,500 a month right now.
Mhm.
And so what I did was I made some assumptions based on you said you had just bought a house. So
Mhm.
I assumed a 30-year fixed.
Yes.
Okay. So basically you have your, 30 years of your mortgage that you're going to have to pay. So you'll probably have that 4,500-ish
Mhm.
expense. And then once that mortgage gets paid off, that you'll need less money because your house will be paid off. So I kind of adjusted for that and came up with this weighted average income of 4,000 a month.
Mhm.
So kind of taking a little bit into consideration the fact that you're eventually going to pay off your house.
Mhm.
So if I took that $4,000 a month and then I had a few different assumptions that I made, I had the 6% return, which is the more conservative return, right? And I used that calculator that I was just showing you, and basically you will need 1.9 million in 18 years to live off of your money, right?
Mhm.
And essentially, to do that, you would need to be investing about $61,000 every single year. Now, there are assumptions here, or there are variables, right? Like
Mhm.
you're you may have income in your retirement. If you have income, that's going to help pay for your needs, right?
Mhm.
The other variable is Social Security. If you have Social Security, that's going to help pay for your needs too.
Mhm.
So this is like super, super conservative.
Mhm.
You're probably on track here. Um, and then if you look at the actual aggressive side of things, meaning 3% inflation, 10% returns, you'll need 1.1 million in 18 years. So significantly less because the
Mhm.
returns are higher. And
Mhm.
then you would need to be investing $24,000 a year to be able to reach that goal. So you really are, because you're investing about 32,000 a year
Yeah.
ish,
Mhm.
right? Call it 32 to $35,000 a year.
Mhm.
So you are definitely on the right track, and you're invested aggressively in equities, right?
Mhm.
So you're going to be on that higher end of returns. We don't know what returns are actually going to be, but we know that that's the track you're on, and we know historically what that has done.
Mhm.
Um, but so as you can see, like you're investing way more than this.
Mhm.
And there are these variables to consider that could help you in retirement. So I was going to kind of pause there and get your thoughts on those two scenarios and kind of comparing it to where you're at.
Yeah, this definitely helps a lot to bring it into perspective to like actually have, numbers, rather than just guessing. I mean, it's still a pretty wide range, of investing 24 versus 65,000 a year. 24 quite realistic, 65 like, you won't have
That's
money.
a lot. Yeah,
So yeah, but this definitely helps because if it's, somewhere in the middle there, the goal is realistic.
exactly. And that was the point I was hoping that you'd kind of see from this, is because there are so many variables, right? Like so many things we don't know about things like Social Security, about things like how your business will earn income. You
Mhm.
could also you could also work a little extra more, maybe,
Mhm.
or work a little extra. Like maybe instead of retiring at 45, you retire at 50.
Mhm.
And there are compromises that you could make along the way. Once you get closer to that point, you can look at your money at, age 40 and say, okay, here's what I have.
Mhm.
I'm on track. I'm close. But maybe for just being more comfortable with the situation, I'm going to work a few extra years.
Yep.
You can pull that lever
Mhm.
to kind of see where you're at once you know have more information. So I would say that going back to your question here, um, let me go back to that slide. Are you on the right path? I would say absolutely. And I would say tools for finding your fire number, play with that calculator that I showed you. And I would say that you are definitely in a good spot here at such a young age.
Mhm.
And as you make more money, you know, throughout your career, because you still have 18 years, that's another variable that we didn't even add into the picture. You
Mhm.
increase your income, therefore you increase your investing. So that's
Mhm.
another positive.
Mhm.
So um, I think that you are on the right path to answer that question. And
Yes.
then I did want to touch on this retirement nest egg versus when I quit my job savings mentality. Tell us a little bit about that.
So the retirement nest egg, I guess, is, thinking about those years of like 65 plus, right? Not really, really, I guess the traditional retirement, not the chill retirement, and thinking about if we, if we are, too old or too sick or whatever it is to live the dream that we thought we were going to live, right? Still having a nest egg enough to, live out our lives, maybe not producing income. In that scenario, we would definitely be living a lot more conservatively, I think, versus, the amount of money, that fire number of like, I can retire, way earlier than most people and, do the things that I want to be doing, right? Like not just relaxing, staying at home. So
Yeah,
that's the mentality, and that's, kind of playing in my head with like kind of how do I separate like that nest egg and knowing that something will be there when I'm potentially, too old to produce anything else, which, is a very, I don't think that's a very likely scenario. Like 65 is still pretty young to even, if we had to get some, part-time jobs or whatever it is. Um, but still a scenario that's possible, versus quitting early to do what I want to do with my life.
yeah. I mean, I think that they're actually more similar than different, really. I guess when I when I think about it, retirement, the definition of retirement is like it's in a box. That's
Mhm.
why like my chill retirement kind of comes in because I feel like everybody thinks of retirement as the same thing. It's the same way. It's I'm going to be sitting on a beach, not working anymore, not
Mhm.
doing anything, bored,
Yes.
maybe. And it's like retirement doesn't have to be that. It can be anything you want it to be. And that's why
Mhm.
the fire movement kind of I don't dislike the fire movement, but I think that the idea of working your butt off to invest everything and live frugally and do all of this to just be 45 and do nothing or
Mhm.
just not have to do anything, if you want to. I mean, that's fine, but
Mhm.
most people are probably going to get pretty bored.
Yep.
So, really, the mindset should shift to I want to have enough money. I like this mindset of when I quit my job savings
Mhm.
mentality. I like it way more than the retirement nest egg mentality because I personally think that retirement should be redefined into you doing what you love and being able to pay your bills,
Mhm.
whatever that ends up being. And I know that I personally have I've done this in my life to where I know that I have what I need to be able to if something ever happened and I couldn't work, I would be okay.
Mhm.
But the goal is I just want to have enough money to be able to make that choice. And so I don't think that I like the way you've framed this, and I think that everybody should frame it this way.
Mhm.
When I quit my job savings to do what I want to do,
Yeah.
and
It's
so
a big mentality shift, like you said. It's the traditional way of thinking of like having a nest egg for retirement, right? Like what everyone, or what a lot of people try to do when they get into, taking care of their finances versus, something that's a little bit more new for, our society, something like fire, where you quit your job to pursue something other than, your stable, secure job.
yeah, exactly. So let's go on to the next question. This one is a good one. How having a child fits into your financial life. Let's chat
Yeah.
about that for a second. What are your thoughts there?
So it's yes. I think about this. I was telling my husband, it's like that Kim Kardashian meme where where she wakes up and knows how to do everything, and then the next day she doesn't know, and she like cries. That's me, about our financial situation all the time. Like we're great, we're on track, we're going to be so successful, with what we're trying to do, and other days, contemplating like kids and these really like unknown variables, because right now I don't have kids. I can't imagine the expenses that you accumulate, and you probably don't even consider, because as you said, you love your child and you kind of settle into this life of taking care of them. You probably don't care about certain budgeting anymore, whatever it is, which is not really our mentality, but that risk is there in my mind, and like I'm afraid of like how much is this child going to cost us, and how is it going to impact our goals.
Yeah, I think that I talked about this recently a lot on my Instagram and on my Twitter. I probably was annoying about it, but um I don't have children, as you know, and I've been just mind boggled with the cost of childcare. I've had conversations with a lot of my followers that they've shared with me what they're paying for childcare, and it's crazy.
Mhm.
Now, if you have look, if if that is something you really want to do, obviously you can afford to do it. You've got
Mhm.
the extra money to be able to make it work, and that's what parents do. They make it work.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing is really the child care is kind of that core expense. So
Mhm.
if you have help, and it sounds like you may have help with childcare to where you will have somebody home with your child.
Yeah. So I think the most likely scenario at this point is having my husband stay at home with the child. Um, because I make the majority of our income. There will still be some loss, right? Like those targets of like him maxing out his IRA, like that additional brokerage account will kind of go down. But if I'm the one who has to stay home, like none of those goals would be met at all. So that would
Yeah.
probably be the most likely scenario. So that's where I panic sometimes, and I'm like, oh, our savings rate will go down so much, right? Obviously, but yes, that's the idea. Like definitely not wanting to outsource that service when it doesn't make sense. If my husband is making just a little bit more than that babysitter or the daycare center.
Well, I guess the good news is that that really expensive childcare really only goes through until they go to school, right?
Mhm.
So it would be probably a temporary situation where the savings rate would decline because you wouldn't be
Yeah.
maxing that extra IRA, and then you could always, catch back up
Mhm.
later. It doesn't seem like it's something that will make you or break you. It may require you to work a few extra years to
Mhm.
kind of make up for that time that your children were very young, and your husband is staying at home to take care of them.
Mhm.
But it does sound like if it's something you really want to do, it does
Mhm.
sound doable, and you could always maneuver things later.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but yeah, okay. So do you have any other specific questions about children,
I mean,
having kids in
I
your
really
money
think
life?
that's it. It's just expect the unexpected.
Yeah. Yeah. The funny thing in the financial planning world is it's like you make a financial plan just to change your financial plan,
Yeah.
right? And that's just the way life goes. There's nothing we can do about it. Okay, so LLC considerations. Talk to me a little bit about what your questions were there.
Yeah, so there it's really a conversation that ties back into like what kind of investing should I be doing now, like Roth versus traditional, considering that, my monthly income will drop drastically. Now, of course, we'll still have to pull from our investments, right? Like we'll still technically be getting taxable income if we're pulling from the traditional, retirement account or from our brokerage account. So just thinking like about where should I kind of like protect, or what's the best case for investing now? Should more money be in Roth? Should more money be in traditional? Because obviously, if I do quit the corporate world, like the income will look significantly different. And as you said, with lower expenses, with the house paid off, and potentially like way smaller food bills, and like way smaller necessities, right? Like if we're living off the land, right? So just trying to, again, so much is uncertain, so much is unknown because we're just at the nascent stages here, but just trying to kind of strategize about what the best place to start is.
Yeah, I think that from my estimates, your tax rate is right now with your salary deferral into your traditional 401k around 11%, your effective tax rate. That was my calculation.
Hmm.
I didn't have every single detail, but based on what you gave me, that's kind of what
Hmm.
I came up with. So that is an extraordinarily low tax rate that favors Roth. Um, so I like that you have a little bit of everything, but in your specific situation, it does sound like Roth would be um, really preferable. Even if you bumped into the 22% had income that bumped into the 22% tax bracket,
Hmm.
my kind of rule of thumb is anything 22%, or less in terms of an effective tax rate. That's a pretty nice tax rate to lock in today.
Hmm.
Um, anything above that, that's where you really want to do kind of the analysis and maybe have a little bit more diversification between traditional and Roth
Hmm.
and taxable. But I like what you've done. It sounds like you've got, do you have more traditional money or Roth money? You said it's 50-50?
Yeah, it's starting to get to more traditional because that was from my previous job. I kind of left it sitting where it was, and at that time I was doing Roth. Now on my new job, I'm catching up to that same amount, probably just about to pass it. So
Yeah. So basically, if you went, do you have a Roth 401k option at your job?
yes.
Okay, so you can do traditional or Roth 401k.
Hmm.
So essentially, that would, if you moved some of that salary deferral from traditional to Roth money, your tax bill will go up.
Hmm.
Um, and so I don't know, how much that'll really affect your cash flow and how important that is to you, because right now you're getting that tax deduction.
Yeah.
So that's something to consider. But the general rule of thumb here, it sounds like Roth is really great for you.
Hmm.
I also don't see anything wrong with having some traditional in there as well because of that tax deduction, but really you may not need it. You kind of have to run some numbers to
Hmm.
see how it would change if you were doing more Roth over traditional and if
Hmm.
you'd be okay with that tax
Hmm.
bill increase because your tax bill will increase slightly, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the trade-off there. But if the future is more important to you and you're more concerned about having tax-free growth and being able to pull it out in retirement tax-free and the future tax rates are more concerning to you, obviously Roth
Mhm.
is the way to go there.
Yeah. And would the same apply to personal IRAs?
Yeah, yeah, because the personal IRA is either going to be traditional, which is a tax deduction, or
Mhm.
a Roth, which is not no tax deduction, but growth tax-free growth. And it's the same principle. You have to look at your effective tax rate and decide, okay, do I need this $6,000 tax deduction or not?
Mhm.
You know, and if
Yep.
you do, you may want to go traditional. If you really don't, then lock in your tax rate with a Roth.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that, that's where I was leaning to as well. But it's one of those things where it's like traditionally people think like I'm going to be making a ton of money until I retire. Then when I go to retire and do nothing and have this nest egg, right? Like I want to, most people want to do traditional, right? Or at least that's how I was taught. Like you want to do traditional. And then when you retire, your income declines, you possibly move to another state, so your taxes are lower, so you're kind of leaving that to the variables that you're going to change later in life. With
Yeah.
I guess our situation and planning on a more longer, more frugal retirement, it's kind of backwards.
Yeah, yeah. It's you even if you did traditional, it sounds like the money that you'd pull out in retirement from that traditional account won't be enough to be a huge tax burden anyway. You could end up a wash,
Mhm.
essentially.
Yeah.
It could end up that your effective tax rate is 11% now. Your effective tax rate in retirement could be the same or lower, right? So, um, in your situation, I think Roth is great, but I also think don't overthink it too much.
Yeah. All right.
Unless you plan on having a lot of income in, like, taxable income in retirement,
Mhm.
don't overthink it too much. On the when we look at history, the lower end tax rates, um, the lower end brackets versus the higher rates,
Mhm.
lower rates haven't really shifted a whole lot over the
Mhm.
decades. The higher rates are the ones that shift a lot and are very, very volatile. Like, they can be volatile. So
Mhm.
that's why I would say don't stress it too much. But
Mhm.
yes, your effective tax rate right now is preferable for Roth, but I also think
Mhm.
in retirement you could end up, not too bad,
Mhm.
even if you have traditional money that you have to pull out.
Okay.
Thank
Awesome.
thanks to your Roth. Thanks to your Roth contributions. All right, so roll over Roth 401k that is in a 2060 target date fund.
Mhm.
Tell us about this and what
So
your
that's
question is.
so in compiling all my my whole financial picture into one place, I realized that I have this target date fund that didn't really have a lot of visibility into, looking through the clunky website from the former employer benefits. So I know you talked about this in the course. It's a mutual fund. It's a little bit more expensive. It's not crazy expensive. It's not over 1% expense ratio, but it's a little bit more expensive than certain ETFs I own. And it's more aggressive, I believe, than some of the other things I own. So it gained a little bit more like over like 10 years, right? Like that fund, but then it also crashed like further than anything else this year. So I'm just not sure if I really need to move it into something else. Or I don't know. I guess I need help on that
Do
decision.
you know what the 401k provider is charging you for managing the account?
So this I called about it and they said nothing, so no additional fees other than
Expense
the expenses.
ratio.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly.
I think you said the expense ratio was
I want to say it was like point.
70 basis points.
Yeah,
Okay, so a little under a percent.
yeah.
So that is kind of high. Um, Target date funds are great because they change for you along the way,
Hmm.
meaning they switch out from stocks to bonds as you get closer and closer to retirement, which is a nice feature. If that's important to you,
Hmm.
you may be able to roll it over into an IRA and keep it in that target date fund. So it's called a rollover. It's called an in-kind transfer, meaning you roll it over and you say, "Hey, I don't want to sell my target date fund. I just want you to
Hmm.
exchange, like literally just roll the fund over to this IRA and keep it intact and
Hmm.
keep it invested." So that's something that
Hmm.
they might be able to do if you want to keep the fund. Most
Hmm.
people roll over their 401ks into IRAs because
Hmm.
typically there are fees with the 401k provider, but in this case, you don't have that. But also, it's just kind of like cutting ties and just getting it out of
Yeah,
the hands of an institution that you're no longer, connected with, right? And
right.
so sometimes people just like to get everything in one place and roll over
Hmm.
old plans and put them into it. That basically they turn into a traditional IRA. If
Hmm.
that's what, well, it can roll over. It depends on what the character. Was it a Roth
That one was a
or
Roth. Yeah.
it was Roth? Okay, so they can
Hmm.
roll it over, into a Roth IRA basically, and it
Hmm.
keeps its character and done, right? So a
Hmm.
lot of people like to do that. I don't see anything wrong with you doing that. If you wanted to switch it into different investments that aren't as expensive, you could, like your IVV, your VTV, your
Hmm.
SCHD. These ETFs are way cheaper than the
Hmm.
target date fund.
Yep.
So that's kind of something to consider there.
And is that something that, like, let's say I roll it into my Fidelity, right? The IRA account. So that would now be part of my IRA, but it would still be that same fund. So that I'm guessing there's several other steps to take to kind of like get out of that fund and get into something else.
Yeah, like basically, if you just want to sell, like they can just sell the fund at the 401k
Hmm.
provider. They can just sell it and roll the cash
Okay.
over. So you can either get a cash transfer into your rollover IRA, or you can get the actual target date fund transferred in kind into your rollover IRA. It's your, going to be your choice. If you wanted to just cash it out, sell it, and buy something different, then obviously you have the right to do that. They're your shares. You can do that if you want to once you roll it over. So, yeah, you kind of have options there, but um, I guess how important is it to you to be able to have that target date fund kind of do work for you and make that transition from stocks to bonds?
Yeah.
Um,
I'm at this point, I think it's a nice feature because, like I said, still in these early stages of like taking, full control of our financial situation. But I think given that I do have, we both have personal IRAs and then like that brokerage with personal funds that we have to invest and manage over time, I think that need will diminish, right, as our skills build up and as our confidence builds up and us doing the right thing.
yeah, yeah, totally. I would say see if you can find a cheaper, maybe something a cheaper target date fund. I've seen them
Yeah.
much less than that. So
Mhm.
that would be something else to consider too. You can still do a target date fund, but maybe something that's much less expensive.
Yeah.
Not to say that 70 basis points is actually, yeah, it is kind of high.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
is
that's
kind of high
real.
considering,
Yeah.
yeah, what we can get a hold of these days. It is a little bit on the higher end. Okay, so I think well, there were a few other questions here, but I think we covered one of those. A good portfolio of ETFs. So that was your question, right? Like,
Mhm.
are you invested in the right ETFs? Anything specifically you have as far as questions on that?
So I guess out of the ones that, so the ones that I gave you, those are the ones in my personal IRA. I know my husband has two different mutual funds in his, and then there's also the current 401k portfolio that has different ones completely. So it's just a matter of like for our personal stuff, 401k I consider kind of separate because that's being managed. But for like ourselves, and actually making the decision into putting our money into the right places, I think it's there. I've made the choices of like buying the value stocks, right? Um, but is that the best decision I could be making right now at my age, considering my goals?
Yeah, so you're very young, so being in a heavier stock allocation, is typically more acceptable for somebody in their 20s, even somebody in their
Mhm.
30s, like me. So, I think that something is kind of more important here is thinking about your asset location, meaning are you diversified across assets outside of equities, outside of stocks? And this is a table of asset class returns over time. So if you think about, bonds, if you think about cash, if you think about small cap stocks, large cap stocks, um, which you probably learned from the course, the difference between a small, mid, and a large cap stock,
Mhm.
correct? And so the idea is to have a diversified portfolio because different asset classes perform better at different times. So historically, we've seen, emerging markets perform, be the top performer. We've seen REITs, which are real estate investment trusts,
Mhm.
be the top performer. We've seen small caps. We've seen cash. We've seen large caps. Um, so, we've seen a little bit of everything over time. And some people are totally fine just being dedicated to equities because that's what's performed well,
Mhm.
for many, many decades. And that's what they want to be invested in for that innovation. And, they're not so much concerned about everything else. So that's something that you and your husband can kind of think about because uh, you. Uh, you right now are pretty concentrated into stocks, specifically large and um, where is that? Oh, let me pull this up for you so you can see it. You're specifically allocated to not only the United States companies, but
Mhm.
also giant cap stocks and large cap stocks. So you are invested in US big corporations, which has done extraordinarily well, and we expect it to continue to do extraordinarily well.
Mhm.
Something that you could do if you wanted to maybe improve the portfolio a bit is to add a bit more diversification. Maybe you add some high quality corporate bonds. Maybe you add some international exposure to developed markets overseas, like
Mhm.
think Japan, think Australia, think um, Europe. So these are things that you could do. And one of the things that I wanted to do is I pulled up in YCharts, I have access to this screener that I can pull the top ETFs by assets that are managed by
Mhm.
the ETF provider. And you can see like IVV, boom, right? You've
Mhm.
already got IVV. That's one of the top S&P 500 index funds out there. So it's a
Mhm.
great ETF. Um, VTV. These are like some of the first ones on the list that you're invested in. So these are absolutely great ETFs. But something that you could do is think about adding something kind of like a total international stock ETF.
Mhm.
So not saying VXUS is something you should invest in, but I'm saying that some ETFs like this that give you exposure to um, more parts of the globe, right? More
Mhm.
markets. This is going to give you some exposure to Europe, Asia. Uh, Still has some American companies, but it's giant and large cap still. But it's giving you
Mhm.
that international exposure if you wanted to have it. Some other things that let's see if I can get back to that fund screener. Yes. So another thing that kind of caught my eye is you could do maybe a total um, international bond ETF and get access to some bonds if you wanted to
Mhm.
reduce the volatility in your portfolio. So these are kind of some of the things that you can do to diversify a little bit more if
Mhm.
that's important to you.
Mhm. I think for the next couple of years, like at least in until I'm in my 30s, like I think I'm okay with staying in mostly stocks, and then maybe adding in some of those.
Yeah, and that is exactly why we
Mhm.
talk about risk tolerance and risk
Mhm.
capacity and things like that. And it's awesome that you recognize that, you feel comfortable with where you're at and
Mhm.
you can adjust later now that you have that skill set of being able to purchase ETFs and understand them on your own. You can
Yeah.
make those adjustments, which is great. Awesome. Okay, last few things. We already talked about the Roth versus traditional, so
Mhm.
we've already gone through that. So kind of the last thing is just chatting about your income once you're pursuing your passion or you're doing your chill retirement.
Mhm.
um, so I guess talk a little bit about what your questions were about that specifically.
Yeah.
Or did we maybe cover that?
Yeah, I think we did cover that a little bit. And, I think it's just all, part of the unknown right now. Because, like I said, next, 2 decades will be spent on seeing how we can monetize on things outside of our jobs, right? And how we can monetize on some of our goals potentially as well. So it's all a little fuzzy right now. But, thinking about it obviously, helps. And having these just vague ideas right now will be helpful towards the final outcome.
Awesome. Yeah. I think that it's amazing to see uh, people like I just feel like a decade ago this didn't exist. People weren't really talking about um retiring early to pursue dreams and do things that they love and not get stuck in the corporate grind. It was like we were all
Mhm.
trained that you had to go to work and you had to get a 401k and get health insurance and like
Yeah.
That was your living the dream, and it's just really cool to see people not only wanting to do it but doing it. I mean, you are literally doing it. I had a question for you. How did you get into, like, what brought you to me? What brought you to finance and
Yeah.
money education?
I think it's a lot of what you just said, just the, going into, so starting a job in New York City. I went to college in New York City, started my first job in New York City. Thought I wanted to live in the city for a decade. Met my husband, and we like joke about it now that he brainwashed me into like this country lifestyle. But it really kind of started with that grind, right? And going through that grind every day, and pre-pandemic, like getting on the subway every day, getting home late from the commute, like not really having like the life that we want, not doing anything that we wanted to do on a daily basis. So it really started with like small steps of like, I think we want to move out of the city in 5 years. Then the pandemic came, and that
Mm.
sped us up a lot in some aspects. We moved back home. We saved money for a year. We knew that we wanted to move to upstate New York. So that kind of that was great, but then also set us back in some ways because the housing market was crazy. Took us way longer to get a house than we anticipated. Had to sacrifice in some of our goals in terms of the house that we got and the property that we got. Um, Also just thinking about goals, like where are we going, potentially having children, and just saying like, I think we've done well saving a lot of money, but it's just been sitting in a bank account, and I think we could do better. And considering the things that we want to live, and it's really all about the lifestyle, right? Like considering the lifestyle that we want to live, and not, wanting to give our kids away for somebody else to watch, right? And like wanting to be there with like our future family, or with our future goals and hobbies, right? With our animals, like there, we could probably do better. Your course, I don't know. I stumbled on you somehow on Instagram, and I followed you for a while before purchasing the course. And this is like a plug for She Talks Finance. Like it was a big decision for us at the time. Like, is this course worth it? Like $300? Like, is it really going to change my life? And like, I think it has like really put
Wow.
us on a, like just a completely different, mind shift. And I'm still pushing my husband to like kind of like help me along, and like do more with me. But like for me, it's definitely helped me get, the confidence and you know skills that I need to move on. And I think that actually at a certain point I was going through the course, and I was like, okay, so I think I'm doing like 60% of this stuff. Like, is that really like, what else am I missing besides that 40% that I need to make an improvement in? Like, was that really all I needed to do, was like max out my 401k for the last 7 years? Like I've been close to doing that, right? And then I worked for a financial institution actually, and there's a life insurance company, and there's a wealth management arm to it. And one day I was like reviewing one of the slides, and the services that the wealth management arm offers is, like financial advisors, and like the specific steps that they will go through with clients to advise them. And every single one of those steps was like one of your course modules. And I was like, yeah, 100%. That is all there is to it. You know what I mean? It's just that's all there is to it. And like, why would people pay, thousands of dollars to do? You still have to do the work of telling people your goals, telling them your financial situation, right? So if you're going to be doing the work, why pay somebody else to just plug in the numbers for you? So,
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of why I created the course, was because a lot of people, like, it's not rocket science. It
mhm.
really isn't. But it's so foreign to so many people, and there
Well, it's
are
scary.
nuances.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
it's your
even,
money.
yeah, and we're not taught this stuff, and it can be for a lot of people as simple as max out your 401k, max out your IRA, know
Mhm,
how to contribute, know how to make the decision of choosing between traditional and Roth, right?
mhm,
Once you start to become a business owner, once you start making business income, once you start having to manage a tax bill, things get a little bit more dicey and a little bit
yeah,
more complicated, and that's why, the super wealthy hire people to
mhm,
do those calculations for them and figure it out. But for most people, it's um there's a lot to learn, but like the nuances with the IRA deduction, the
Mhm.
deductibility of the IRA, depending on how much money you make, and
Mhm.
there are certain nuances that you just need to you don't know what you don't know,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
Um, and that's kind of what the point is of why I built that is you don't know what you don't know. Here's what you need to know.
Mhm.
And for most people, it's more simple than they think.
Yeah,
Um, and for a lot of people, it's just changing behavioral, issues. It's changing mentalities.
yeah,
Um, or it's just realizing, oh, wait a minute, I am beating myself up over my finances, and I'm completely on the right track,
yeah.
and I'm gonna be okay.
That's
It's
one thing that
getting
we
that.
had going for us, that mentality of, being thrifty and not being big spenders like ever, was something that helped us out a lot, and like we're, really lucky that we didn't have bad behaviors, growing up and in our, early career years. So that really helped a lot. And it definitely helped we had along the way. Like for example, we had help buying a car, and that's a huge expense. And something a lot of people finance, and it takes years to pay off, years of interest. So there's definitely been things that helped us along the way. But yeah, just trying to be like, conscious of where our money's going, and you know thinking like, do I really want to be doing this for 65 years just to then do nothing? Like, I don't want to not do anything.
Yeah, I want to play with animals
Yeah, exactly.
and grow delicious food.
Yes.
Yeah,
There was
that's
one
awesome.
actually question that I had that my husband really wants to address, is the
Okay.
life insurance policy.
Yeah.
So that's a decision right now, because that money, as I said, could be going into his personal IRA. I believe he's paid something like 7,000 into it already, and can cash out 4,000 right now. Um,
4,000.
yeah.
So that's typical. So it's going to be a loss, but basically, if
Mhm.
because they have surrender charges. Unfortunately, do you have a need for life insurance? If you have a need for life insurance, it may not be a bad idea to keep it because you
Mhm.
can also, I mean, if you ever had to take a loan from it, which I don't suggest taking a loan from it, but
Mhm.
if you ever had to, you could. There's cash
Mhm.
value that you can borrow against. But um, I guess, yeah, it kind of boils down to how long does he have to pay it for it to stay enforced? That's the other question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I had kind of assumed in
They
perpetuity.
can all be they can all be different. It could be one that you have to pay for the rest of your life or
Yeah,
until
that's
you're at
kind of
like age
what I assumed.
100.
Yeah.
And if you don't pay it, it will lapse. Or they may have some you pay them for 15 years, and then
Yeah.
it's paid up and you don't have to, um, it's a paid
Yeah.
up policy.
I think it is one of the
So,
longer terms.
sorry.
I think it is
It,
one of the longer terms. Like, I don't think
okay.
it's like a 15-year. I have to double check, but my assumption is that it was like continuous.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of tricky because if you think that you can take the money and invest it, if you take the surrender value, invest it, and take the money that you were paying for the premiums, and you think that you can do better,
Mhm.
and that's money you can actually use in retirement, versus
Mhm.
you have to die to receive it. So that's kind of the trade-off, right? It's
Yeah.
like if there's an insurance need, especially if you're going to have children, you can always get a term policy.
Yeah,
Like,
that's the debate we were having. Like right now we don't have a need for it at all. When we have kids, we can get a term policy, and even though like it may be a little bit more expensive since we'll be older when we're getting it, it's still like a term policy will still be probably a whole lot less expensive than a whole life policy.
Yeah, and then you don't you can actually have that money invested and kind of contributing it to your "when I quit my job nest egg,"
Mhm.
quote unquote, right? So it'll be usable funds. So
Mhm.
that's a trade-off. It's a trade-off, right? Like you're going to be taking a loss on it, but
Mhm.
you take that money, you invest it, you have it, into retirement. You can actually use it if you need to use it.
Mhm.
Do a term policy when you need it for the period that you need it,
Mhm.
and then But it really just depends. You'd have to run the numbers to kind of figure out what would be worth it.
Yeah. All right.
But it
That's helpful.
sounds like if you guys don't need it,
Yeah.
then I hate that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
hate when I hear people that are young that are sold whole life policies. It's just not
Yeah.
necessary
And I
for
think what would
most
be,
people.
yeah, what would be wiser, if anything, like I said, my husband works in the trades, and you talked about this in the course, is getting uh, what's the other, IDI,
Disability?
disability. Yes.
Disability.
Um, and considering that he, in the next couple of years, he may actually stop working and be, stay at home dad. Again, that need also kind of diminishes, right? If he's not going to have that job anymore. So still
Yeah.
some thinking we have to do about it, but I think it's probably not the smartest, like you said, to have a whole life policy that we don't need right now.
Right. Yeah. Run the numbers, see what the investment would look like, using that $4,000 base being invested. Because
Hmm.
you're not starting with zero, you're starting with about 4,000 bucks, right? And then
Hmm.
run the return on that. And that's how you can kind of make that decision.
Yeah.
You
Awesome.
may not end up with $100,000, but you'll probably be pretty close, and it's usable money in
Yeah.
your lifetime. So there's like that trade-off. But
Yeah.
awesome. Well, this has been really awesome. I've really enjoyed talking to you and working through some of these questions. Any tips or tips or tricks or advice for
Do the course.
fellow fellow finance families out
Yeah.
there?
I think just do the course. The hardest part is really setting your goals. And honestly, like your question was like, how did you get to this point? And it took years. It took years to figure out what our goals are. And when a lot of these things are best to do when you're younger, but a lot of these things are also the hardest to figure out when you're younger. So,
Very true.
the point still stands, like put your money into like a 401k or an IRA, if whatever you have available. But, saying, to my younger self now is like, it's okay to not know what you want, just try to save money. A lot of people that I know don't save a lot of money. And I think that's probably, it doesn't put you in the best position when you do know these are my goals. So
Awesome. I think that's great advice. Well,
thanks
I
so much,
appreciate
Nikki.
your time today. You know how to find me if you have any questions or anything.
Sounds good.
Have an awesome day.
You too. Bye. Thank you.
Ciao.